Welcome, everybody, to this podcast. This is in our Beyond Sustainability series of podcasts at GCX. I've been looking particularly forward to this conversation that I'm going to have with my colleague and friend, Kati Lewis, who heads up Impact at GCX. I think this is probably a very timely opportunity to have this conversation and very necessary because a lot of our clients are wanting to understand where this is all at the moment. When we came up with the title of this podcast, which is ESG, another corporate hack or a gateway to impact, there's a huge amount to unpack in that title. ESG is not sustainability. Let's just get that straight from the beginning. ESG is a framework that makes reporting easier and more practical for companies. But there are many things you can do with it, like in life, good things and bad things. It's hackable, and we've seen that. And there lies a lot of the contention and controversy around it, is that actually companies who get to know the framework can do things with it that make them look better than they are. The question is, what next? Beyond greenwashing, beyond sustainability, which is really our tagline and a good reason for it, but moving into impact, measurable, authentic impact. To us at GCX, if we're not driving a positive impact that's measurable and provable, then we're not doing what we subscribed to do when we started out doing this. So, where are we right now with ESG, sustainability? The world has really gone through a huge amount. Sustainability in the last 5 years has grown, it's become a strategic imperative. But in the last year, we've seen something happen that I just regard as a chasm. It's a chasm that we would experience in any diffusion of innovation, which what sustainability is. It's a bell curve, and we've gone through a little bit of a bit of turbulence because of geopolitical and political issues. So having said all of this, I think I want to introduce Kati. Kati is our head of impact and very practical. She has a team of professionals working for her that I believe are making magic inside GCX and are transferring that magic over to our clients. And we're going to unpack some of that today. But Kati also comes with a lot of experience on the other side of the fence. Having worked in a corporate for many years, on the company secretary side of things, she brings a pragmatism to sustainability, because if you haven't had that experience, sometimes you get frustrated or you think, well, everything that we propose is going to work, but that's not always the case. So I think to start this conversation, I would like to first start very, very macro and global and see where we are right now with all the latest happenings and events and the impact that it's had on the sustainability space. Kati, where are we?
Such a big question. It can go so many ways, but you know how I think I like to look at things, starting very bird's eye view, macro trends as you were talking from a global perspective, but then also looking at the overlaps and the intersections in a more national and regional perspective as well. For me, and you mentioned it, and it is for sure everybody's talking about it, trying to figuring it out, what to make of this, would be these geopolitical tensions. I mean, there's been a huge, people call it the backlash, people call it the rollback, especially from the US and then the European Union as well. And it's the anti-ESG, and it's specifically speaking about ESG as the concept, right? You don't really see anti-sustainability. or anti-impact. And what does that mean? So now you can start understanding or talking about, so what is the difference between ESG, sustainability, and impact, and why are people so emotional about it? You know, they get very animated, and you can't even have a conversation where people get like, no, this is how it is, and we can't speak about it, that which may not be named. That is a big mega trend, and it has affected the global stage quite substantially. I think one of the reasons for this backlash is, in my view, and this is what I've seen, is when people use ESG and they make statements, but it's not real. It's not authentic. It is this whole thing about greenwashing. You make targets, you set targets, you make statements, you have these boilerplate, look good, feel good statements in your integrated report. But when you speak to teams in a company, I mean, we read a lot of integrated reports and sustainability reports, right? And then we engage with the teams across the different divisions and departments and so on. And then I think to myself, what you're writing in your report and what I'm hearing, there's a little bit of dissonance. There's a little bit of disconnect. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's backlash, is you say it's so important. You say diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. But now you are chasing quotas instead of truly understanding what inclusion means. Inclusion and diversity, for me, means how do you create a safe space? How do you create that enabling environment in a corporate, and especially in a multinational where you've got multiple sites, multiple locations, regions, countries, divisions, departments, etc., right? How can you sing together? You want that orchestra. And how can you ensure that people bring their best cognitive abilities, their creative abilities, that spark, those creative leaps? How do you work together? But if you're in a space where you're appointed as a sort of a proxy for something, and it's not the right fit, and people are not working well, this is not your superpower, and it just doesn't gel, then you're missing the point. Diversity is about different ways of seeing life. It's about perceptions, mindsets, interpreting things differently. That's the true value of diversity. You want that. You want someone from a different culture, a different language, how you experience water, for example, because you will get to new insights and new solutions, and that's the power of diversity. So that's just diversity, right? Sustainability, as opposed to ESG, is where you look at it from a much broader perspective. So understanding why is a company important? What is the significance? Why would it matter if this company doesn't exist? Marion Roberts, that's very sad. 120 years, and it's now been liquidated. That's sad. I mean, it leaves a gap, right? Because it's important for a company to show progress in the construction industry, but now that's gone. So it's not just about financial prosperity, which is critical, and that's where it starts, right? If a company, whether you're a not-for-profit or a profit, is not financially sustainable, for me it's like you do not pass go, you do not collect 200 rand, you cannot go on. But it's so much more than that. It's understanding what your financial planning, your allocation of your funds, your allocation of your resources, your activities, and your operations. How do these things impact or influence the broader ecosystem? How do you contribute to GDP? How do you create jobs? It's not about reducing jobs. You want, especially in South Africa and SADC, countries like Kenya, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, the list goes on. How do you actually create jobs, sustainable jobs, and improve the standard of living? How do you contribute to positive social impact in society. How do you make things better? And then obviously the big thing which is close to our hearts is how do we protect Mother Nature? I feel very strongly about this. We are the custodians. It's a huge responsibility, not something that we should be taking lightly. You know, small decisions, big decisions, consolidated decisions, understanding what the legacy is that we are leaving. We are really borrowing from our children. We don't have a right to this. How do we identify the negative impacts that we have? How do we make plans collectively to reduce it, do less harm? But we have to go further than that. It's not sufficient anymore to say do less harm. It's how can we move the dial towards positive impact? And that is what sustainability is all about.
Okay, so I want to take this back a little bit, Kati. Talking about macro, geopolitical, and political trends right now, I'm going to mention his name, Donald Trump, because he's probably had the single biggest influence on so many things right now. I think his attitude towards climate change, his attitude towards ESG, his very brutal, very commercial outlook on economies, his tariff games that he's played. Is it all bad? You know, I think, you know, the US aid stuff, it's obviously been a lot of shocks to many systems. But at the end of the day, what we've seen, and certainly from my perspective, is that we need to take a more balanced approach to things, right? Something that, and we also need to, it's forcing companies to look at the logic of what they're doing, or question the logic of what they're doing with sustainability, and under pressure to actually drive more business value rather than to be seen to be doing so much, but actually doing so little. Mm. Can you respond to that?
Yeah. Again, big question. Mm. Personally, I don't subscribe to the way that all of these things are being done. For me, it talks to core values. And sustainability, like everything else, is underpinned by core values. One of the most fundamental values that we as humanity need to strive for is respect. And respect is a big thing, right? Respect for people, respect for the process, respect for the global economy, respect for nations, respect for justice. And it feels that it's disrespectful. When you're in a position of power and your strategy is to not have a conducive conversation and not understand where that other person is coming from, not understand what those challenges are, and it's really about winning at all costs, no matter what the price is, I find that sad. I think we can do much better than that. However, it is what it is. We deal with what we have, and great learnings and reflections from this. It's a pendulum, right? Huge action, reaction, craziness, and then the pendulum swings, and hopefully we'll get to the middle. So, to answer your question, I don't think it's all bad. I think there are nuggets, golden nuggets, coming from all of this, and good consequences, which potentially, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what's going to happen, and it's actually unrealistic to know, how things are going to, we can have scenarios and speculations and so on. But one of the good things about this is it really questions the heart of what is sustainability. What is it that we want to achieve? Sustainability and the definition of sustainable development ties back to economic development. I mean, the seminal definition, 1987, by the Brundtland Commission, where everything started, our common future. Sustainable development is economic development where you want to meet the needs of the present generation, and those needs are many. So it would be economic needs, social needs, environmental needs, development needs, all of those. And here's the kicker. You have meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And here you talk about justice, and you've got multiple layers of justice. You've got interspecies justice, and we spoke about that earlier in the car, right? Mm-hmm. So we have Homo sapiens, and we have the plants and the animals and all good things living. So how do you make sure that the one species doesn't dominate and destroy the other species? How do you get that balance between not taking more than Earth can regenerate? And that's the ecological safe space, the ecological ceiling that Kate Raworth talks about in her Donut Economics, and that's the basis of the 9 planetary boundaries, where, by the way, we've already tipped 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, which is really great cause of concern. So that's your ecological one. Then you've got social, and it's fundamental. So it's what are the needs and the expectations of humanity and societies. And here you have intergenerational justice. So current generation, future generation, the whole big thing about sustainability, but also intergenerational justice. And that's where I think it's unfortunate that there was such an abrupt withdrawal of US aid. Because you have vulnerable communities who couldn't adjust quick enough. I understand the rationale. I also believe that we have a lot more control and influence over our own lives, and we should be solving our problems. I'm a strong believer of not constantly looking at someone else to solve our problems. We are clever. We can do this. If we pull together and we actively work on these wicked problems or grand challenges, we can definitely contribute. We don't need other people to do that. It helps if we can work together. We never say no, but you cannot expect other people to do that. So these are the 3 types of generational justices that I'm talking about from a sustainable development perspective. So if you look at that, then I think the good thing about these geopolitical aspects which has happened, and Trump's specifically his influence, is people have stopped and they've realized, oh my word, I need to be part of the solution. How am I going to do this? People are resilient and they are able to pivot. I told you the story about, I live in Kabeja, and you know this citrus valley, and many of the farmers export to the US predominantly. And they've realized, well, if I want to keep on having a business, I need to find alternatives. And there's been a shift to exporting to the East solutions. So, you know, when you're in a position, you're like, oh my word, how am I going to solve this? You surprise yourself. And that for me is a good thing. Increasing resilience, increasing new solutions, finding better ways, more efficient ways of sorting out your problems, and then you've got the ripple effect, which benefits the greater society. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And then another great thing that comes from this is people are reflecting and saying, how realistic is this? You know, we always about practical and pragmatic sustainability. Way back when, 700 years ago, when I was younger, I had a more of an activist mindset. But you know what? People don't listen to you. When you are screaming and shouting and making a scene, people go like, oh, please, just that woman. You have to listen. You have to be pragmatic. You need to be silent and then only think about what people are saying and then respond. That is important. So understand where they come from. How can you apply funds in a more effective way? how can you create targets, develop strategies, whether it's decarbonization, water, diversity, human rights, whatever it is, how can you make it real, practical, and impactful? And that's value creation. So I think it's contributed to the whole concept of value creation as opposed to, grandstanding, if I can put it that way.
And I think that's right. I agree with you. Sustainability, unfortunately, got lost in a bucket of other issues that actually undermined its reputation and the importance and the value that it could add to society. I think that it became an activist thing that, not necessarily a bad thing, because activism does raise awareness, but if done in an appropriate way. I think what's happened is that people have, or companies have taken a look at their strategies and the bold ambitions that were signed up for without much thinking or contemplation have been more seriously interrogated. I think people are looking at, and I think the opposite's actually happened. If I look at some of my clients, which one of them we were in a meeting about yesterday, unbelievable work that they've been doing, all right? And whereas before they would be so quick to go out and beat their chests about it and make a big noise about it, today they're actually probably on the, could be cautioned out for green hushing, okay, which is the opposite of greenwashing. Because it's also not a good thing. They're doing things that are very pragmatic, they are very doable, they are very commendable. And to be honest, it would be great if, and they have gone out in the public domain about it, but it would be great if more people saw it, because it's inspiring and it's showing leadership in a certain sector. But at the same time, not a bad thing, because what we saw 2020, 2021, 22, 23 is a lot of activity, a lot of talk, a lot of long reports that actually are very difficult to consume and mind-numbing. And I know this is a big thing for you when it comes to KPIs and sustainability issues and verbose reporting. Give me a sense of that. Give me a sense of that, Kati, because you've probably read more integrated reports than anyone I know. Okay, so you're well qualified to respond to this. Tell me about it.
And also remember, I started on the other side of the table where I was responsible for the integrated report before it was even a thing, right? I mean, I've been doing this for such a long time. And oftentimes people think more is better. I am very certain that less is more, and it's getting to the gist, getting to the so what, which is important. I keep on telling my team and also clients, it's equally important what is not on the page as what is on the page. And you cannot just keep on adding because GRI has issued out a new sector standard, and you've got all these SASB standards, and you've got a myriad of framework standards, raters and rankers. There are literally hundreds of raters and rankers. And if you are chasing everything, you get lost and you don't know who you are and you don't know what is significant or what moves your world. So pull it back. Fundamentally, why are you doing this? What is the rationale? What do you want to achieve? What is the information that your stakeholders need? And what do they do with it? Ultimately, sustainability data and reporting should be the best crib notes ever. It's like the King Code. It's like really clever, right? And the TCFD 4 pillars. The amount of cognitive excellence that went into developing these frameworks, the SDG frameworks. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's a very good framework. You might as well use it because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But it's about how do you consolidate and make it your own. Understand what are your drivers, what are your enablers, what are your key challenges, your risks, the flip side of risks, what are your opportunities, and then you get to double materiality, which I can speak about forever, which I won't. It's your impact and how do you combine. So it's understanding your material things, which I call material matters. Well, many people call it material matters. getting to the essence, not more than 5 on one hand, really pulling it up. And then our beautiful cascade model, breaking it down into topics, subtopics, very logical, very easy to understand. And you go like, oh, but of course. Okay, I understand this. And then you get to KPI and metric and indicator level, and then you roll it back. So Maximilian in our team, he builds these beautiful frameworks, right? And what works like a charm is when you unpack it from a row perspective, right? When you really go into the nuts and bolts, you ask the question rationale. Why should this KPI make the list? What is your rationale? What is it that you want to achieve with this information? If you can't answer the question, take it out. And this is like an iterative, recursive process. It just strengthens your thinking. You want robust thinking. You want things that are compelling. And so now you combine your material matters with your key stakeholders. So what is important for the company from a financial perspective, financial prosperity, what does that look like for you? Unpacking that, understanding it, matching your narrative, your compelling story from a qualitative perspective with your KPIs and your quantitative data. And now you've got a story.
Yeah.
Now you look at it from the other side. Who are your business partners? Who do you engage with? Who do you rely on? And you are interdependent to have a thriving business. And equally so, do you appreciate the impact that your decisions and activities have on your stakeholders? Do you know what that is? And it's not reciprocal, but it's a two-way street. You can't just have a narrow view of life, all about me, me, me. How do I improve myself? And that's also why I moved away from, I was a lawyer, commercial work, because it just felt like life is more than a competition. You don't have to win at all costs. And I know many people disagree with me, but leave something on the table. You have to have a proper, decent deal where you feel everybody's getting value for this. And that's what it is. So understanding what that is, and sometimes you've got to be tough and say, you know what, this is not in the best interest of the company. I'm sorry, I can't do this. I know you want this, but this is not going to work for me. But equally so, your levels of empathy must be high. You have to walk in the shoes of other people to understand why it's significant, why are they making such a big racket of this, and then finding people in the middle. For me, it's really about finding that equilibrium and balance. And reporting should reflect that. Less is more.
Let's talk about business value, okay? Because if we want to get ESG, sustainability, back to the status that it deserves and the necessity of it, given our current global issues and crises that we are faced with on a daily basis. Let's talk about double materiality, because it is a fantastic tool, right? It's an awesome tool, okay? But, it's like everything, all strategies are not born equal. All double materiality assessments are not born equal. But yet they're commoditized in corporates because they are a word and corporates work like that, right? But the fundamental basis of it is the actual initiation of risk, of value creation, right? It's identifying those risks, right? And what do we do when we start off with these things? We ask the company, please would you share your risk registry with us? And sometimes we get pushback. Okay, and we think, well, why don't they want to share their risk registry with us? Why is it so precious, right? Because actually, firstly, they're the same risks, okay? And a lot of those risks can be addressed by sustainability solutions, right? So having a sustainability risk register and a business risk register, to me, is not only counterproductive, it's counterintuitive, and it's actually setting us on the wrong path, where sustainability function in a business is a side hustle to the business function. So right there is when we actually need these things to converge, right? So that we can work on the actual issues, not on the soft issues that people want to see that make a company look fuzzy and nice, right? And then obviously, it starts off with risk. ESG is always associated with risk, right? Understanding this, the things that could that could actually create reputational issues for the business, that could create commercial issues for the business. But at the end of the day, these are the issues that need to be managed. And where does business value start? It starts with managing compliance risk, managing, and I think talk to those levels of risk, Kati. Okay, because compliance is certain things that are non-negotiable. Okay, and then there's other risks that we can sort of take and have more of a threshold for. At the end of the day, there's no real credit for compliance. Okay, you get into trouble for non-compliance. Okay, but we want to go beyond that. And to your point just now, the flip side of compliance and risk is opportunity. And we want to unlock opportunities that create business value. That's when it gets exciting. That's when executives in businesses start to believe, right? Whoa, you gave me an ROI on a sustainability initiative. Okay, what else can you do? Tell me a bit more about this process, because what we've also experienced that is probably the most exciting part of the work that we do is that epiphanal experience of getting a team to do 180 degrees from being, well, why are we here? This is a grudge purchase. We don't understand it, to, my goodness, okay, look what we can do with these tools and with these concepts.
So risk management is a fundamental, as I said. And one of the things that we consider when we evaluate the maturity of a company is definitely risk management. So you spoke about compliance. When you have a compliance mindset, for me, that's sort of the start of your ESG sustainability journey, which is necessary, and it is a go, no-go. I mean, we all understand that, especially legal compliance, you've got different types of compliance, right? You've got legal compliance, you've got voluntary compliance, from a perspective where when companies develop their own policies and position statements, that's voluntary. But can you imagine how crazy it would be? You make your rules, but you don't comply with your own rules. Crazy, right? Then you have compliance where companies say, you know what, I believe in a proper management system like ISO. That's also voluntary compliance, but it builds into your compliance universe. You've got memberships, which is a fantastic thing. If you're in a specific industry and you subscribe to an industry association, and that association would then have certain principles, performance expectations, standards, reporting standards, etc. If you want to be a signatory to, say, the UN Global Compact, it's all voluntary, but then you know there are consequences. And that drives your behavior and your decisions and your maturity from a risk perspective. Because as soon as you have to report, you cannot report on something which you don't do. And you cannot do something if you don't have planning. Can you see how it pulls back? So it's really reverse engineering to your basics, and that talks to your value creation model, understanding what your inputs are, what are the activities that you need to perform to get to your outputs, which are your products and services and waste, what are the outcomes of your products and services, and then ultimately where you want to get to is the impact, the so what is the effect or the change that you bring about in the system. So when you start with compliance, you look at your market risks, your financial risks, operational risk, but now you can expand it. And that was also the value of the integrated reporting framework, which is helpful to companies where you've got your six capitals of value creation. It breaks it down into your social and relationship capital, your intellectual capital, natural capital, human, etc., etc. And you've got a broader conversation, and you've got a broader base to understand what are those things that could threaten the company's ability to achieve its strategic objectives, because that's the purpose of a company, right? Is you want foresight, you want to identify what those things are, understand what it means, evaluate to what extent you can eliminate, or you can then decide, well, this is my tolerance level. And that was one of your questions, is how do you evolve? So with certain risks, you want a zero tolerance, and that's quite clear. Compliance is one of them.
Health and safety.
Health and safety is an absolute zero tolerance, etc. Corruption, I mean, you can't say, oh, it's okay, we can have a little bit of corruption. Yeah, it's like a no-go. Then you have other aspects where you say, you know what, we actually want to take on a little bit more risk because it gives us more opportunities. But if we understand it better, if we can analyze the situation and appreciate what are those controls and multiple controls that we can put in place, then we increase our tolerance level and we're happy with that, and we've got a band. And I see this more and more in companies that we are assisting with the work, where they are becoming a lot more maturer in this whole enterprise risk management process. How do you identify your risks, considering all kinds of risks, financial and non-financial? How do you assess it? What are your mechanisms and your methodologies to really assess and evaluate those risks? Then you get to the quantification bit. How do you get scientific around this? And now you've got a lot more information to take a more informed decision, and that then obviously bleeds into your strategy. It might even potentially change your business model, your business strategy, and your decisions, your financial planning. So it's really about evolution and making sure that it permeates and it's embedded in the company across all departments, because also what you see is you don't want an inconsistent application of the philosophy and the decisions of what these risk tolerance levels are, what these different types of risks are, how do we deal with it, how do you classify. I mean, sometimes you see risks in your integrated report, and then it's not the same in the sustainability report. And I'm like, isn't this the same company? It should be all the same, right? It cannot live separately. It must be absolutely integrated.
Let's talk about regional sustainability. Let's talk about our stomping ground, the place where we live and the place where we operate. We are definitely doing a lot more work in the emerging markets than we are in the developed markets. With all this noise around sustainability, it seems actually, not ironically actually, that Africa gets the importance of sustainability more than other regions, right? We operate in South Africa, we've got our challenges, but we're still quite a sophisticated business environment that aspires towards developed world business. Right, but more recently we've been doing more and more work in SADC region, South African, Southern Africa. A lot of work in Malawi, which has been so exciting. And there, obviously, Malawi being one of the 10 poorest countries in the world, it's been really fascinating, right? Because firstly, we all know that Malawians are, firstly, wonderful human beings, very capable, very intelligent, and very educated, the people that we deal with. But there's a huge part of the population that is suffering, right? Being able to take our frameworks and methodologies to a place like Malawi has probably been one of the most rewarding and fulfilling things to watch. Okay, and you and your team have been there many times already, working with different companies, very influential companies over there. And what we can see really for the first time, because after 18 years of being in this business, maybe 19 years now, I'm always questioning what impact have we made, right? Because we have a good, we have a really good run with the company, and then the leadership changes, and then things change, and then, people bring their own story in, and you feel like you've lost momentum, and you go from 0 to 0. But in Malawi, Zambia, in these places, what you're seeing, and what I believe, is that we are definitely going to move the needle on impact, right? And potentially across the whole country.
For sure.
Right? By just taking ESG as a framework and as a foundation, evolving it into true sustainability, and as a gateway to authentic, measurable impact, right? And having then influenced by co-creating strategies in all different kinds of companies, from financial sector to hospitality sector to government departments, we are able to take the issues of the country and the challenges that these companies are experiencing within that environment, and connecting it to local people on the ground who are severely challenged for basic needs and in poverty and experiencing inequality. And I think it's probably been, for me, really refreshing, because you can see the potential of what we're doing in a very raw way. Tell us more about your experience, because it's your team that's doing the work.
I must say, Kevin, that's been one of the most rewarding and awe-inspiring work that I've been doing. And it's a big privilege. It is a huge privilege. You know, when someone places that amount of trust in you, you've got to take it serious. It goes back to the respect thing. It goes back to the integrity thing and the value thing. So GCX's value lies in, to what extent do we move the needle? That's our success, is how do we contribute? And I mean, we're definitely not the only factor, but how do we contribute to the success and the prosperity of our clients? And then you can see the ripple effect. That's why we exist. And to what extent we can influence the thinking, improving the thinking, which will lead to better actions, which will lead to impact. That's what value creation is all about. So coming back to the Malawi story, we've spoken about Sunbird, and we have a wonderful relationship with Sunbird. We started a few years ago. It's a hotel group in Malawi, listed on the Malawi Stock Exchange. And we started from ground zero because, as you know, the Malawi Stock Exchange has now introduced in their listing requirements the requirement for companies to now report on their sustainability performance, whether as part of their annual reporting or as a standalone report. But again, as I said, if you want to report on something, you have to put something in place. So we've met with the board, we've done training, we've introduced sustainability, well, ESG and sustainability as a concept. And you can see every time you engage with them, it's like it's a building block approach. As you gain more insights and as your knowledge base increases, the type of questions change, the conversations change. It's really an exponential movement where it's a fundamental shift in the way that the company is doing business. Because now you understand the impact from a systemic perspective of what your decisions have. And when you then support it with data, and you know what to look for, how to gather the data, how to aggregate it, and how to analyze it. Because there's also no sense in having information and you don't know what to do with it. It drives your decision making. So it assists with operational, and operational are normally energy or efficiency improvements. Tactical, it's how do you pull it up so that you can understand more from the type of resorts that they have, you know, on your exco level traditionally, what are those types of decisions that you take? And then strategic board level, what are those fundamental shifts that you are making? So what we are seeing there as well is the importance of Sunbird in the supply chain. And I'm going to leave it to you to talk about the wonderful work that Chifanero is doing with charity as well, where you understand how the importance of a company in the supply chain, upstream and downstream, and how it changes the way that people do business, how communities are involved, all different stakeholders. So that's the one bit of Sunbird. Then we were invited by the Malawi Stock Exchange to do some training. And we did it online. It was phenomenal. And we spoke about this whole concept of double materiality assessment. What does that mean? As the foundational building block to all things sustainability. That's where you start. So Tola in my team developed this beautiful, synthesized 6-step process. We took the EFRAG methodology, which is close to 90 pages, this document. I mean, I read it a few times, and it's like, oh my word, hectic, right? And you distill it into 6 key steps, but then you can break it down further, and how do you apply it, etc. And it makes it real. It asks you, okay, what is the context of the company? How do you understand what your material matters are? How do you identify and assess your risks, your opportunities, and your impacts? How do you pull it together? What does this iterative process look like? How do you get the voices in the room? Because remember, it's not just a vertical hierarchy where you speak only to the board, the exco, and this is sustainability executive who's responsible for that. But it's definitely understanding the functions and the divisions. And that's the beauty of it, because now you've got different perspectives, different views, understanding why it's important, and now it's a synthesis, right? Pulling it all together, developing that framework, and then you've got a story to write. And now it's clear, because you can also see, we are here, we want to get here, we know what the gaps are, we know what the quick wins are, let's implement. What are the medium step activities that we can take? What are the long-term, big hitting items that's really going to move the dial? But you need time, you need expertise, you need management, cognitive thinking. So understanding what the process is from this management perspective, and then pulling it all together. So now you have a clear understanding of your context within the broader ecosystem. You understand the material matters that are significant to your business. You understand what those risks are, how you can convert that or leverage it into opportunities, what your impacts are, how do you increase your positive impacts, how do you decrease and aggressively work on minimizing your negative impacts, and pulling it together so that you've got a compelling story.
Touching on the word you mentioned about cognitive thinking of management, let's just elevate that a little bit, just to 2 words, leadership and culture.
Yes.
Okay. What we're seeing in Malawi from a lot of the companies, and that is just so inspiring, is great leadership, right? An authentic desire to do better, but not only for the benefit of the company, but for more than that, right? Which just speaks to sustainability. That's why they get it. Right, they're sick of the poverty and the suffering and all of that, and showing them the ways, particularly with Sunbird. Sunbird was a wonderful example because there was a real business problem. There's a currency crisis in Malawi, access to currency. There's access to local fresh produce and other goods and services. There's a whole lot of things that actually is right on their doorstep if they just connect the dots, right? And there's lots more to be done like that. But coming back to leadership and culture, because it's a big thing. This has always been probably the difference between getting serious traction on a sustainability program and wheel spinning.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's always been frustrating. Sometimes we've had a great leader and then they get replaced by a leader who just wants a return on investment and make me money, save me money, or get out of my office. Right? And then it's like, well, hold on a second. Sustainability is not always as simple and cut and dry like that. There is certainly returns on investment that are huge when it comes to things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, very measurable. But that's not sustainability. Those are things that companies should just be doing anyway because it's better business. More important than leadership is culture, right? Because if you have a real, authentic, fantastic culture in an organization, they will not replace a good leader with a bad one. It would not allow, the culture would not allow that, right? And we've seen it. There's one company, and I'd prefer, we won't mention names in South Africa, but there's one particular company that stands out, and it's not only because, actually it is leadership across the board, where in a relatively short period of time, we've had that switch from, what are we doing here, cameras off in meetings, just can't wait for it to finish so they can get on with their day jobs. And then it's switched to this is the day job. Okay, what makes that happen?
Sure. Again, a big question, and it's definitely multi-layered. There isn't just one thing. I pull it back to values. Great leadership is the ability to understand the macroeconomic and the big ticket items that you need to have a successful business, and appreciating the value of each of these elements. Seeing your employees, and not the normal tagline, oh, our employees are our most important asset. If I read it one more time, I'm just going to get something. But you need to mean it. You need to show it. Think of COVID. That was for me, I was still in corporate in COVID. And I must say the company that I worked for, they were really brilliant there. They cared about their employees. Other companies, the first thing that they did was no work, no pay. How do you do that? We're all in this together. So that's a very good example of, if you say your employees are your most important asset, what does that mean? Clients of ours are actively working on how do you improve wellness as a big concept, not only of their customers, but of their employees as well. That is sustainability. That is leadership. That is promoting good culture. But culture is hard work. Culture and leadership for me is the same as raising your children. You know, my mom's a very wise woman, and she taught me a lot of stuff, my father as well. But she said, if you want a good relationship, you've got to work at it. And that's the same thing. It's not a once-off thing. It's not a token, let's have a wellness day, let's do hot dogs or a braai on a Friday afternoon. Yeah, that's fun, but it's got to follow up, and it needs to be real, and you need to know that people really care about this, and it matters to you how your employees get to work, for example. Very simple. Do they have enough money to live on? Don't tell me, oh, you know what, I can't afford it because I am above the legal limit for a living wage. My word, what is that? That doesn't work, right? You've got to understand what are those big challenges that employees face, and how can you might not be able to eliminate everything. And again, practical, pragmatic, you've got to find that sweet spot. But at least you need to be cognitive of it. You need to take it seriously. You've got to give it the respect. Talk to your employees and find a joint solution. Pull them in the room and make them part of the decisions that affects their lives in different ways and forms. That's just one part, employees. Then it's about understanding how you can improve the financial prosperity of your company without paying a price that you are not willing to pay from, for example, a social perspective, where you say, the first thing I do is I cut jobs. Maybe there are other ways. When you are in a financial position where you are stressed, which happens all the time, are there alternative ways to first reduce your costs and increase your revenues before you do that? Sometimes that is what it is. Then you have to live with it, but don't make that your default position from the word get-go. Same with your environmental activities. I don't think it's good enough to say, well, we're above the legal limit. We still pollute. We're still killing the river, but that's okay. We're not going to get into trouble. That's not leadership. That's not culture. You know, you want to wake up in the morning and think, yo, when my kids can see what I'm doing, they're going to go like, that is my parent.
So there's a couple of things I want to get into. I want to talk into a more balanced approach to sustainability. Double materiality. I mean, what we have seen, thank goodness, is a convergence of frameworks and standards, right? So that there's less noise, and it seems to be moving or in a direction that's going to be easier to consume with more policy certainty. And those two things are reflected in double materiality. It's IFRS, S1 and S2, which is on the financial materiality side, and then obviously GRI, which is particularly relevant to Africa, on the impact side. So what is the impact of, good society and environment on a company, or the opposite? And what is the impact of a company on society and the environment?
Yeah.
Right. On the IFRS side, and I gave a podcast in 2018 with SAICA, South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, as well as from the University of Witwatersrand, Professor Warren Maroon from the accounting department. And we had Sean Doherty, a CFO, progressive CFO. And we had a conversation about the chief financial officer becoming the new chief value officer. It's something that Professor Mervyn King has coined, that phrase, and we love it, right? Because the financial departments in companies need to get their heads around value for sustainability to get sufficient investment into, and understand that not everything is around, well, if I give you $1 million, when am I going to get it back, right? Because it's a very short-term view, and it's a view that limits creativity and innovation around sustainability. Where are we now with these things? I know most stock exchanges, the JSE, it's still voluntary guidelines on sustainability and climate disclosure. But where are we with these things? Some companies are pushing towards just financial materiality and leaving out impact materiality. What is the trend on that?
So globally, we have seen this international baseline moving towards IFRS S1 and 2. It seems more likely than not that will become the trend. And if you follow the IFRS Foundation's website, they have a very nice page where you can see the number of countries and jurisdictions which have formally adopted it into their compulsory reporting and which are now open for comment and responses and moving towards that. So there's definitely a big shift towards IFRS S1 and S2. And as you know, the IFRS Foundation has taken custodianship of the TCFD recommendations, which have disbanded, and the 4 pillars have been incorporated into those standards, which is really clever, and it makes a lot of sense. They've also taken over the custodianship of the integrated reporting framework, which is such a powerful and useful tool, because now you've got the combination of your integrated thinking principles, which is also under the custodianship of the IFRS Foundation, your integrated framework, which explains your value creation process with your 6 capitals of value creation, and really gives you a very practical framework of how to tell the story, supported by IFRS 1 and 2 from your 4 pillars. So that's more the narrative, the processes around it, your governance, strategy, risk management. So those are qualitative narrative predominantly, and then you've got metrics and targets, which then supports it from a quantitative perspective. So now you marry all of this, and it gives you a solid understanding what are those key risks with the opportunities that influence your prospects, which used to be your enterprise value, so financial materiality. As we know, GRI has been around forever. I think it's 1997 or something like that. Very well established, incorporated in a lot of, so like, for example, the Malawi Stock Exchange is recommending GRI. Integrated reporting in South Africa, most companies know GRI very well, internationally as well. The benefit, and on the flip side, the challenge with GRI, it's so extensive. You've got multiple standards, you've got sector standards now, which is being developed. It's a lot. It's a monster. And companies look at this and they're like, I don't really know where to start. It's so much. What do I take? What do I leave? How do I go about it? And you can see there's now a systematic approach to make it more accessible and understandable. So it's the combination of this, and this is what I was saying, that just makes it a lot of sense. So you take your IFRS S1 and 2 from your financial perspective, and you select your GRI based on your material matters. You have to understand what is material to your company, and you marry the two. So even though IFRS only speaks to financial materiality, here's the kicker. if you do not look at the things that you are dependent on for your business, if you do not have an appreciation of what the impacts are and the effects are that you have on the broader economy, that in itself normally leads to significant risks. So you're doing it in any event.
Yeah. So let's talk about embedding sustainability, because I think, most of the stock exchanges, the reserve banks in companies, in countries, they're creating policies around this stuff. And it starts off with reporting, right? And we're seeing it particularly in Malawi. People are just hacking together reports because they need to comply with the voluntary disclosure guidelines of the stock exchange, and then they soon realize that there's something lacking, right? There's a strategy lacking, and there's no real cohesive way of actually putting the meat on the bone of that report, other than to phone people at the end of the year and say, tell me some good stories so I can report on it, right? So it's going back to strategy, but where the rubber really hits the road is strategy is worth nothing without being properly executed, right? So we pride ourselves on that at GCX because we are partners to our clients, right? We are partners on their journey to sustainability and beyond. The beyond is a very important part because it's a never-ending journey, and sustainability isn't a good destination. It's something that keeps the status quo. So what are those important things? We've spoken about leadership and culture, which to me is the most important thing, right? Without that, you are just always going to be wheel spinning. Okay, we've got a massive, massive focus on data at GCX. We picked up in 2016 that companies were scrambling, trying to organize their data in a way without the proper tools and technology, yet expected to report on as much, if not more, non-financial data as there is financial data in an organization, right? And companies were stressed out and they weren't accurate, and they were, I suppose, exposing themselves to disclosure risk, right? So we're working on that, but then that's for reporting, and then we sort of get to, well, how do we operationalize this data so that we can inform the right decision-making at every level in the organization? What are the other key things that you believe are critical success factors in ensuring that a sustainability strategy and program is implemented in a way that delivers on business value, but also completely changes the mindsets of people? Because change management, and that's probably something we haven't touched on enough, is a massive topic.
Which is true.
Give me your insights on that.
So I want to go back to the leadership and culture thing. And it's a fallacy to think that only the top leaders are responsible for culture. Culture is everybody's problem, and culture is everybody's responsibility. When you think of a high impact and a high safety environment, like your manufacturing environment, your oil and gas, your mining, etc., that safety culture is so drilled into you that you take it home, which is a good thing because you want to change. Talk about a mind shift and understanding that. Even now, today, when my son would cut the grass or mow the lawn, I would say, where's your PPE? Are you safe? Don't do this, you can't do that. Because it's so ingrained in how we do things. Put your safety belt on, don't speak on your phone when you drive. And that's because of the corporate culture. So when you live in a company, it's so much more than just your day-to-day job, right? When you see something that someone is doing which is against the values, and that person is not living the values, you must have the responsibility to speak up, but in a civilized way, and say, maybe there's a better way of doing it. So that's a very important thing. That's how you embed. And it's the same with sustainability. When you talk about something, don't just look at it from a pure financial perspective. Think wider and say, what are the non-financial aspects which could influence this decision? What am I missing? How should I expand my thoughts? Who should I pull in the room? And this multidisciplinary, multi-departmental approach is fundamental to sustainability. That's a critical success factor. Sustainability is also not one person's responsibility. It's understanding how you use governance as your secret weapon. It's the best thing ever. It's how do you organize yourself? How do you get to the right information? How do you distill the the important information and the sort of interesting but not fundamental information. These are all critical success factors. How do you get data to information, to knowledge, to actionable knowledge, to deep insights that leads to better decision making? That's a critical factor. Do you have processes in place? Are you being deliberate about this? How do you upskill your people? How do you evolve the level of conversations that you are having in your company? How do you make sure it's on your agenda? These are all fundamental things that you need to put in place to make sure that your sustainability sticks. You don't want it a once-off thing. Risk management, maturity of risk management, data is golden. Data is golden. How do you solve for fragmentation? How do you solve for aggregation of data? How do you pull it together? What do you make of it? How do you pull it back into your strategy? How does it inform all of these decisions that you are taking? And then it's sort of a closed loop system. Data is fundamental to all of this.
And I suppose the other thing is, what are the levers of change, right? And I think, we're sustainability professionals and we're not change professionals, okay? And we've had to understand change management because people are generally resistant to change. Let's not try and fix what's not broken. It's working. But, is it going to be working in 10 years' time is the question. So what are those levers of change? Because people respond to carrots and sticks, right? And for me, it's like, probably one of the biggest things that have driven positive change inside business is ESG-linked bonuses for executives. Very practical thing. Sustainable finance, a very practical thing to achieve certain sustainability KPIs. So there are all these things that need to be firstly made aware to companies, but secondly for them to take advantage of these opportunities.
And I also think less is more in this instance. When you have a list of actions, when it's so overwhelming and you've got so many things on the go that people just feel like, I don't know where to stop and to start, that's not helpful. So when sustainability or ESG just becomes an additional requirement and responsibility of people without capacitating them, without giving them proper training and awareness, without giving them the big picture of where it all fits together, and tools. Again, how do you pull in your data? How can you make it easier? We haven't even touched on AI. We haven't even touched on technology. AI is a game changer, but you need to use it in a clever way, and we are doing that I think we're doing it quite well. It's a combination between always having common sense, your topic, but then amplifying it with artificial intelligence. Cut the time and get to the heart of it, and that combination. But you can never just use AI and say, oh, there we go. That human intervention is always important. So those are, I think, critical success factors. And be clever about it. Just get to the point.
Kati, I think we've come to the end of our the time allocated for this conversation. I could go on for hours chatting with you, and we do. We have those, not in front of the camera, but I thoroughly enjoy the interactions that we do have on a daily basis about this stuff, because it's not a sack of potatoes that we're providing here. It's a very strategic solution, and with lots of elements to ensure its success. But I think, to sum it up, I think we're probably in the most sober space right now for companies to embark on sustainability strategies, because we have to really question the logic of what we're doing with sustainability. I enjoy that. And having a more balanced approach to sustainability that isn't just focused heavily on climate or thing, because, you don't want to get into situations within companies where there are ideological disagreements. You want to provide people with something that absolutely makes sense to them right now, to the generation right now. We've got more than enough problems to sort out right now, and with sustainability being the most appropriate solution than to have to think about problems in 3 generations' time right now. And I'll say something right now that is highly contentious, and it's probably one of my favorite sayings, is as a species, we're not that important. Okay, there are thousands of species on this planet. And if we can't solve the problems we have got right now with the tools and the intelligence that we have, then we don't deserve to survive as a species. Okay, and why are we so Why are we so hung up on our survival as a species? Right? So we need to do better now so that we can do better, Kati. We can do better. And certainly from where we're seeing it with our clients, we're seeing wins all the time that are so inspiring and are so exciting. So thank you so much for the conversation. And we're going to have many more ourselves, but I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Likewise. Thank you, Kevin.